I had 9 minutes before the clerk stamped the file under legal hold. The judge smiled like it was theatre, and Rourke asked my call sign as if it were a punchline. The room waited for me to flinch. If I said the wrong name, June's school pickup became a lever. If I said nothing, they'd bury Brine Lantern clean. I said it anyway. Jag Courthouse, Norfolk. Day 1 morning. The gavel cracked once. The microphones hissed like they resented being awake. Nameplates shone under the lights. People in uniform sat in neat rows, watching like it was a drill. Vice Admiral Calder Rourke looked at me the way you looked at a policy you planned to enforce. His voice stayed mild, almost courteous, which only made it worse. "Councillor Vale," he said, letting my last name hang. "For the record, your call sign." He stressed it like a dare. Chairs shifted in the gallery. Someone suppressed a laugh the way you suppressed a cough in church. The judge's smile didn't reach his eyes. The clerk's stamp sat beside a thick folder with a red label folded over the top edge like it wanted attention. The wall clock ticked loud enough to measure my pulse. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I didn't look. I didn't have to. June's school sent reminders like a metronome. Pick up time, pick up lane, pick up rules. A schedule that only mattered until it became leverage. I leaned toward the mic. "Cinder Kestrel," I said. Rourke's eyebrow lifted, pleased. "There it is," he murmured, like I'd performed on cue. "Still playing radio games." Lieutenant Commander Grant Holden made a neat note, fast enough to feel practiced. He was younger than Rourke, polished in a different way. His smile at me was the kind you gave when you were about to close a door. The judge cleared his throat. "Let's keep to the matter at hand." Rourke spread his hands. "Purely for identification, Your Honor. We wouldn't want confusion." Confusion. Right? As if this was about clarity and not about making sure the room decided I deserved whatever came next. Holden rose with the smooth patience of someone who never had to wait for a door to open. "Miss Vale," he said, "today is about accountability. The Navy doesn't take allegations lightly." He delivered it like a courtesy. I kept my eyes on the red label, not the contents. Along the bottom edge, there was a routing line with a compartment code that didn't belong on a courthouse file. Not a docket number, not a case ID, something that belonged somewhere else. Holden's gaze flicked there too, then away a fraction too fast. That was my open question, and it landed before my lungs did. If this was a clean legal proceeding, why did the paper look like it had already lived a second life? Rourke turned to the judge. Before any discussion of evidence, the government moves to place the file under legal hold. The clerk's hand hovered over the stamp. The room leaned in, expecting me to object, to rant, to give them something easy to dismiss. Less than 9 minutes now. The clock was eating them. I stood. The chair legs scraped, loud in the microphones. "Your Honor," I said. "One question for counsel before that motion is granted." The judge's smile tightened. "One." Rourke tilted his head, amused. "Counselor, you're welcome to preserve your dignity by sitting down." It landed exactly where he wanted it to land, between my ribs and my reputation. I turned to Holden. Holden was the blade. Rourke was the handle. "Lieutenant Commander," I said, slow enough for the reporter, "once this file is under legal hold, will I be restricted from copying any material added today, including the witness timeline you intend to introduce?" Holden's smile held. "That is standard." "Yes. And this motion," I said, is being made at the government's request, not the court's. A small pause. The kind microphones loved. Yes, Halden said. At the government's request. There, on the record. Not a speech. A pin. A way to make the lock visible. Rourke's jaw tightened. The judge tapped the gavel once. Granted. Legal hold is in effect. Proceed. The clerk stamped the folder with a thud that sounded like a door locking. Ink spread and dried. The red label looked brighter after, like it enjoyed becoming untouchable. Helen stepped forward. The government calls its first witness. A man in service khakis stood from the back row and moved like he'd been told exactly when to stand. He sat without looking at anyone who might remind him he was a person. His hands went flat on the wood, as if he'd rehearsed where to put them. Holden's questions came crisp and narrow. On the morning of the incident, he said, "Where were you at 0740? At the base gate, sir. What time did you observe Miss Vale? 0742. What time did you make your report? 0745. 3 answers. Clean. Too clean. No friction, no hesitation, no human second guess. Like someone had wiped the smudges off the truth and called it discipline. Helen glanced at me, pulide. No further questions. The judge looked down at me. Cross. I stood again. I stared at the wall clock. I stared at the red-labelled folder under legal hold. Then I looked at the witness and wondered who had written his morning for him. Courthouse hallway to parking edge, day 1, midday. The air outside the courtroom felt colder, like the building kept its real temperature for the people who mattered. I walked fast enough to look purposeful, slow enough to look controlled. Behind me, the door shut with a soft click that sounded like a decision being made without me. My phone buzzed as soon as I was out of the judge's line of sight. One short vibration, then another. Texts, not calls. The kind you could ignore in a hearing and regret at the curb. I didn't read them yet. I watched the hallway instead. Boots on tile, paper shuffling, staffers moving clipboards like shields. People passed without looking, because looking counted as taking a side. It was the cleanest kind of social abrasion. No one touched you, but you still felt scraped. Halfway to the exit, a man stepped out of a doorway marked records and stopped like he'd been waiting for a gap in traffic. Miles Cade, he said low, not introducing himself, reminding me I already knew him. Miles wasn't in uniform. He dressed like someone who survived by not looking like a problem. Plain jacket, plain shoes, ID badge turned inward. His eyes stayed on my hands, not my face, like he was checking whether I carried something I shouldn't. "You're not supposed to talk to me," I said. "I'm not," he said. "That's why I'm doing it fast." I asked what he'd seen. He nodded toward the courtroom door. "The witness timeline," he said. "Too clean." "I know it feels clean," I said. "I need to know where it breaks." He glanced at the ceiling camera, then back to me. "You want the crack?" "It's in the paper, not in the mouth." He slid a folded slip of paper from his pocket like it was an accident. Not a full document. Not a leak. A single line copied from a docket printout. "Look at the times," he said. "And look at what room they claim the report got logged from." I unfolded it without making a show of it. A location code. A timestamp. A Klag initial. It took me 2 breaths to see the problem. The witness had said he made his report at 07:45. The docket line showed a login at 07:44 from an office inside the courthouse, not from the base gate. Not from a security kiosk. Not from anywhere you could reach without passing through checkpoints and at least one line. I didn't need a map. I'd stood in enough lines to know time didn't bend for paperwork. If the log line is real, I said, he wasn't where he said he was. Miles didn't nod like a teacher. He nodded like someone confirming a fact he'd rather not have. That's my one point, he said. You can verify it. You should verify it. And you should do it without asking me again. A woman in dress blues walked past us and didn't look at either of us. She hugged a folder to her chest like it was a life jacket. The hallway suddenly felt too public. I asked why he was telling me at all. Miles's mouth tightened. Because if you miss the crack, they'll seal it. Then it's just you versus their story. His gaze flicked to my pocket when my phone buzzed again. This time it was longer. A new message. The kind that arrived right when you didn't have room for it. I looked down. Just enough to read the sender. School office. I didn't open it. Not yet. The cost was real either way. If I read it, I'd show I could be pulled. If I didn't, I'd be pulled anyway. You're shaking your own lane, Miles said, watching my face. Don't let them watch you do it. I'm not shaking, I said, and heard the lie the way a microphone would. Miles leaned closer, voice barely there. Another thing. Not a gift. Not a second point. A warning. I waited. In records, he said, there's a compartment list attached to the sealed inventory. One compartment is marked Do Not Touch. No handler armor. No routing. Just a label. He didn't say it like a dramatic reveal. He said it like a hazard sign you pretended not to see until you hit it. What label? I asked. Miles's eyes held mine for half a second, then dropped away. Brine lantern, he said. The words didn't feel like a code anymore. They felt like a hand on the back of my neck. I slid the folded slip back into my palm. I asked if he could get me the list. No, Miles said immediately. That would be the point that burns me. Then what can you do? I asked. Miles exhaled once, controlled. You can ask me one question I can answer out loud in a hallway. I hated that he was right. I hated that I still trusted his limits. Tell me where the log line came from, I said. Which terminal? His eyes flicked left, then right. Clark Station 2, he said. Courthouse side. Not the gate. That was enough. Verifiable. Something I could put my hands on without turning him into a story. A door opened behind us, and Halden's laugh floated into the hall, brief and confident, like he had already decided how this would end. Rook's deeper voice followed, Quieter, and I couldn't make out the words. I didn't need to. My phone buzzed again. School office, unread. The clock was still eating. Miles stepped back, already distancing himself. If you push on that contradiction, he said, they'll push back somewhere you can't file an objection. June, I said. He didn't answer. He didn't have to. I walked out into the parking lot with the slip of paper warm in my fist and the label in my head like a stamped order. Brine lantern. Base housing, Day 1, afternoon. The courthouse air followed me home, polite and cold, like a stranger who already knew my name. The door chain hung at the wrong angle. I stood on my porch and listened. Air conditioner, a distant lawnmower. Nothing that matched the little click that had been half a beat off when I pushed the door. Everything looked normal. That was the problem. June's backpack leaned by the hooks, exactly where it always went. The hallway light buzzed. The mat sat flat. The deadbolt sat straight. The house was performing for me. I let the chain fall. It fell the way someone else let it fall, not the way I did. In the kitchen, the ceramic bowl where I dropped my keys waited on the counter. A dime sat on top of them, face up, centered like a marker. We didn't keep change in that bowl. June didn't either. If it had rolled there, it would have landed crooked. The dime didn't look like money. It looked like a message. We were in your space. My phone buzzed. School office. A schedule is just a schedule, until it becomes a handle. I opened the message. June's pickup contact changed. Please confirm. I hadn't changed anything. I hit call. The line rang twice. School office. A woman answered, bright enough to sound harmless. This is Tessa Vale, I said. Why does your system think June's pickup contact changed? A pause. Keys clicked. Ma'am, we were instructed to verify, she said. Just routine. Instructed by who? I can't say, she said. It's for safety. June's safety? Yes. Ma'am, please confirm the correct pickup information. Do not release her to anyone new, I said. We never do. Please don't worry. Worry was the point. I ended the call and looked at the dime again. The coin didn't change facts. It changed ownership. It turned my kitchen into a room I had to behave inside. A knock hit the door. Light, but certain. I opened it with the chain still on. A neighbour stood there with a misdelivered package. He kept his eyes on the cardboard. This came to my box, he said. Thanks. He hesitated. Base admin asked about you, he said. Said it was a check-in. What kind? I asked. The kind where they don't smile, he said. They said you should be careful about making this a spectacle. Did you tell them anything about June? No, he said fast. No, I swear. I need you to remember who it was, I said. 2 people. Uniform. Anything. He flinched. I can't. I have kids. I'm not getting on anyone's list. I'm already on the list, I said. He handed me the package like it burned and walked away. By the time I drove to pick up, my hands had decided to stay steady, even if my stomach didn't. A staffer I'd never seen before stepped into my lane and held out her hand. Miss Vale? Yes. I need to see your ID. It's policy. It wasn't yesterday. It is today. She took my license and glanced toward the building. It's about safety. Safety for who? For the child. Please wait. For what? For confirmation, she said, and disappeared inside with my name. The bell rang. Kids spilled out. June appeared with her ponytail swinging, backpack straps sliding off one shoulder. "Mum," she said, climbing in. "You're early. You're doing the face." "What face?" "The don't ask face." She looked at me. "Did court go bad?" "It went controlled," I said. June snorted. "That means bad." She tugged her backpack into her lap. "Someone talk to the office lady," she said. "A lady in uniform." My grip tightened on the wheel. "Did she talk to you?" "No. She talked about you, like you were a form." "What did she say?" June dropped her voice to mimic it. "We just need to confirm a few things for safety." "Did she say her name?" June shook her head. "No. Shiny tag. Smelled like the nurse's sanitizer." She frowned, searching. "She asked what time you pick me up, and the office lady said, 'Same time.' Then the uniform lady said, 'That can change.'" The air in the car thinned. "I'm not going to let anyone handle you," I said, and it came out sharper than I meant. June's chin lifted. "I don't need handling." "I know," I said. "That's not what I meant." I kept my eyes on the road. If an adult asks you questions about me, you don't answer in the hallway. You come to me. You tell me what they asked. June's voice went small. "Is that normal?" "No," I said. "That's why we're doing it." She stared at me, then looked down. "Am I in trouble because of you?" "No," I said. "You're in my life. That's the only reason." Back home, the air conditioner hummed. The hallway light buzzed. The dime still sat on my keys. Face up. Patient. At the kitchen counter, my notebook waited. I didn't write paragraphs. I wrote 3 lines. June protected from unofficial contact or monitoring. Effective immediately. No procedural trap that drags me back. No leash. A defensive evidence shield. Enough to keep me from being crushed, without detonating the whole world. June read over my shoulder. "What is that?" "My plan," I said. "Is it legal?" "Legal enough." My phone buzzed again. Unknown sender. "Sign the paper. Keep your kid." Base corridors and the shipyard road. Day 1. Late afternoon. The pressure had a new shape now. Not hidden, not dramatic, just official. At the first checkpoint, my badge beeped and the guard said, "Go ahead," like he was letting weather pass. Routine sounds. Routine control. I felt eyes on my back anyway. A guard stepped half a pace into my path without fully blocking it. His tone stayed bored, which was its own message. "Councillor Vale?" he said. "You're requested to remain in designated areas." "Requested by who?" I asked. "By command," he said, like it was a forecast. "It's authorized." "I'm going to admin," I said. He lifted his chin toward the corridor. "Then keep moving," he said. "And don't make it a scene." "Keep it boring," I said. "Exactly," he said. When I turned, a man in civilian clothes looked past me like I wasn't there. Another, a few paces behind him, pretended to study a bulletin board. No one blocked me. No one hurried me. They didn't need to. They were there to make sure I knew I was being moved. I kept walking and read the signs like they were a map out of a cage. Offices. Admin. Forms. People carrying clipboards like shields. Who had the authority to make following feel like procedure? At the second checkpoint, a woman held out her hand. "Badge?" she said, not unkind, just practiced. I handed it over. She scanned it. Beep. Her screen flashed in her glasses for half a second. "Where are you headed?" she asked. "Admin," I said. "Which office?" "The one that routed my life into a courtroom," I said before I could stop myself. Her mouth tightened, but her voice stayed smooth. "Ma'am, this is a compliance check." "Compliance with what?" She gave me the same smile the school staffer had given me. "Procedure," she said. "Keep moving." I kept moving because stopping would have been the only real scene I could make. Outside, the shipyard smell found me. Salt, oil, hot metal. The air had teeth. One of the men from the corridor stood at the edge of the lot, hands in his pockets, face turned toward the water like he enjoyed the view. He didn't look at me. He didn't have to. Presence was the point. I slid my phone out and let my thumb hover over Miles's name. Then I stopped. Miles's one point was still hot. I wasn't going to turn him into a fountain. Roan Della was my next door. He'd been on base long enough to know where paperwork died and where it got reborn. He also had limits, which was why he was useful. His office sat behind a glass door, with a faded sign and a smell of old coffee. I knocked once and went in like I belonged there. Roan looked up from a stack of stamped forms. He had the exhausted expression of a man who'd learned the system didn't hate you. It just didn't see you. "This," he said. "Not welcoming. Not hostile. You're not supposed to be here. Neither is a courtroom timeline that lies," I said. Roan's eyes flicked to the hallway behind me. "You're being watched." "I know," I said. "I need one thing." He leaned back slowly. One thing is still one thing too many. "I need the chain node," I said. "The initial that approved the route. The part that shouldn't exist." Roan exhaled through his nose. "You're trying to burn me." "I'm trying to keep my kid from being touched," I said. "That's not the same thing." "I know," I said. "I need one thing." He leaned back slowly. "One thing is still one thing too many." "I need the chain node," I said. "The initial that approved the route. The part that shouldn't exist." Roan exhaled through his nose. "You're trying to burn me." "I'm trying to keep my kid from being touched," I said. "That's not the same thing." Roan's face tightened at the word kid. He reached under a folder and pulled out a single sheet, stamped in 3 places, ink still sharp. He didn't hand it to me. He held it like a boundary. "You didn't get this from me," he said. "I didn't get anything," I said. Roan tapped one corner with a fingernail. "See the routing line?" he asked. "This form should go through housing, then legal. Instead it went sideways." "Sideways to where?" "To a command review desk," he said. "And the initial here?" He pointed quick, then covered it with his thumb, like cameras could read pressure. "P." Don't say a full name in here, Roan said. You think walls listen? I think people do, he said. And they write things down. My stomach dropped in a clean, quiet way. Pike? I said. Roan didn't confirm. He didn't deny. His eyes said, You said it, not me. And this is connected to the witness timeline? I asked, forcing my voice to stay even. I don't know what you saw in court, he said. I know what I'm seeing here. A signature chain anomaly. A route that tells me someone with weight decided you weren't allowed to have a normal day. Maybe it was a typo. Maybe it was a template. Either way, it was a line that shouldn't have been effortless. I held the sheet in my mind without taking it, because taking it was the part that became a crime. What can I verify? I asked. Roan's gaze flicked toward the door. Klerkstation, he said. Ask for the stamp log. Compare times. If you're careful, it looks like you're doing your job. That's as close to advice as you're going to give me. It's as close as I can afford. A shadow crossed the hall window. One of the men, closer now. Not inside. Not yet. Just present. Roan saw him too. He slid the sheet back into his stack and nudged a different form toward me, blank and harmless. Adekoi. You came to ask about a housing correction, he said, louder. You're missing a signature. Of course I am, I said, matching his volume. The man in the hall paused, pretending to check his phone. Then he moved on. Not gone, just repositioned. Roan's eyes stayed on mine. That initial, he said quietly, means you're not dealing with small people anymore. I wasn't, I said. I just hadn't admitted it. My phone buzzed hard in my pocket. I looked. A new message. Sinasil. Nadine Crow. Meet me. Alone. Now. A quiet office. Day 1. Night. The air conditioner hummed, like it was trying to cover up words. The windows were dark glass, reflecting my face back at me the way a courtroom microphone did. Flattened, exposed, on record. Nadine Crow didn't offer coffee. She didn't offer comfort. She offered terms. Stop, she said. Stop pushing. Stop asking. You want safety? Trade for it. I kept my hands on the table. Pen, paper, cheap tools for an expensive decision. On the corner of the page, June's hair tie sat in a loose loop, something she'd left in my car and I'd pocketed without thinking. It was ridiculous that a piece of elastic could feel like a hostage. Crow watched my eyes flick to it. She didn't smile. She didn't have to. I can keep her out of the blast, she said. Out of whose blast? I asked. Crow's voice stayed level. Out of the unofficial one, she said. The one that doesn't file reports. So there it was. The admission that there were 2 versions of reality, and only one of them bothered with paperwork. Crow leaned forward just enough to make the room smaller. You walked out of that courtroom like you thought you could win, she said. That's not what happened. They're going to make you smaller until you fit. You mean Rourke? I said. Crow didn't confirm. She didn't deny. Her silence was a skill, and it made every name feel radioactive. What do you want? I asked. I want the file to stay contained, she said. I want you to stop lighting matches near it. And I want you to keep June's name out of your mouth in public spaces. I felt anger try to turn into a speech. I cut it off before it could become a gift to her. Are you saving me? I asked. Or managing me? Crow's eyes held mine. Do you care which one pays the same outcome? She asked. That was the loop she wanted me to swallow. Was she help? Or was she just a handler with better manners? I pulled the paper closer and uncapped the pen. The click sounded too loud in the quiet. I don't trade in vibes, I said. I trade in terms. Crow's gaze dropped to the page. Terms, she repeated, like the word tasted foreign. Clean exit pack, I said. 3 items. Effective, immediately. Not promises. Crow's mouth tightened. You don't get to demand a pack. You get to survive. I'm already surviving, I said. That's not the deal I'm taking. Crow waited, and it was the kind of waiting that dared you to blink first. I wrote the first line and read it out loud so she couldn't pretend to misunderstand. June protected from unofficial contact or monitoring, I said. Immediate effect. Crow's jaw flexed once. That's not fully in my control. Then you're not the person in front of me, I said, and let the sentence hang like a test. Crow's eyes flicked to the hair tie again, and for the first time she looked irritated, not calm. Fine, she said. Go on. I wrote the second line. No procedural trap that drags me back, I said. No leash. Crow laughed once, short and humorless. You're in uniformed space, she said. Everything is a leash. Then don't sell me freedom, I said. Sell me something you can deliver. I wrote the third line. A defensive evidence shield, I said. Enough to keep me from being crushed. Not enough to detonate the whole world. Crow's gaze sharpened on that last clause. That's the first smart sentence you've said tonight, she said. It's the only world my daughter has, I said. Crow leaned back, and the chair creaked like it objected. You want a wall. You want an exit. And you want it yesterday. I want it by morning, I said. I want a timeline, a deadline. Crow's eyes narrowed. You're giving me an ultimatum. I'm giving you a choice, I said. You deliver the pack, or I go around you. Crow tapped the paper once with a finger. Not a signature. A warning. You go around me, she said. And you ignite the whole file. You don't get to do that and pretend you're protecting June. The cost landed clean. If I accepted her, I accepted limits. If I refused her, I accepted chaos. What's your concession? I asked. Containment, she said. You keep your hands off public theatrics. You keep your mouth off names. You don't make tomorrow's session into a spectacle. Tomorrow? I repeated. So you're admitting there's a second round? Crow's eyes didn't move. There's always a second round. That was the turn, whether she meant it as one or not. This wasn't a one-day humiliation. It was a process. I capped the pen and slid it toward her without letting go. Tell me one true thing, I said. Yes or no? No speeches. Crow looked at the hair tie again, like it was the only honest object in the room. "Is Brine lantern real?" I asked. The air conditioner hummed. The glass reflected. The base outside kept its secrets. "Yes," she said. "And is it protected?" I asked. Crow held my gaze for a long beat, then nodded once, like it cost her. "Real," she said. "Protected." Then, almost like an afterthought, she added, "And if you force my hand, Admiral Sloan will stop being a rumor." My phone buzzed in my pocket. Not a message this time. Just the kind of vibration that meant the room had shifted. Crow watched me register it and said, "Morning. This he'd fast." Day 2. Morning. Jag Courtroom. The second day smelled like recycled air and old paper, the kind that made everything feel pre-decided. My phone buzzed in my pocket before I even stood up. Once. Then again. Not loud, just insistent. Someone wanted my attention while I was on the record, and I didn't know if it was noise or leverage. Holden stood at the lectern with his hands folded, patient as a clamp. He didn't have to raise his voice to squeeze. He only had to ask the judge for structure, and the room would hand him a collar and call it fairness. "Councilor Vale," he said, "keep your questions to the scope of direct." Rourke sat behind him, calm, as if he was watching weather. He didn't look bored. He looked entertained. The witness sat in the box like he'd been poured there. Pressed uniform. Eyes forward. Not a name I could use. Just a roll. Roll stayed clean. The stenographer's keys clicked in steady bursts. Legal hold meant the file could still speak. It just couldn't leave the room in anyone's pocket. I rose. The microphone turned the soft scrape of my chair into something official. Helen lifted a finger. "Counselor, just ask." He wanted me hurried. Sloppy. Emotional. He wanted me to fight on his tempo. Could I make them step on their own mine without raising my voice? Could I make the record do the work? I looked at the witness. "You handled the packet delivered to this courtroom on day 1. "Yes." "And you saw the label on the outside?" "Yes." "So whatever was written on that label is what you understood yourself to be responsible for?" Holden didn't object. Explaining why the label didn't matter would have been a risk. I kept my tone even. On day 1, the government moved to place the file under legal hold. Holden's smile appeared and vanished. "Objection. Counsel is testifying." I didn't argue. I didn't give him a speech to swat. I used him instead. "Lieutenant Commander Holden?" I said. "Does legal hold restrict handling?" His eyes flicked to the judge and back. "Legal hold restricts improper handling. As you know." As you know, the reminder that I was supposed to stay in my lane, even while he drove me toward a ditch. I turned back to the witness. "You did not create the label?" "No." "You did not print it?" "No." "You did not seal the packet?" "No." "And you did not have independent knowledge of the contents before you received it?" Holden opened his mouth. The witness answered anyway. "No." The keys clicked harder. Holden's jaw tightened. A clean admission, recorded in black and white. Rourke leaned back slightly, like he'd just heard a punchline. I didn't look at him. I kept my eyes on the witness, because this wasn't a performance. This was a trap with paperwork edges. You testified the chain of custody was uninterrupted, I said. Yes. And you testified the packet arrived exactly as it left the evidence room? Yes. Without alteration? Yes. Heldenrose. Objection. Asked and answered. The judge's mouth tightened. Move on, Counselor. Hell no. Almost polite. And keep it to yes or no. I met the judge's eyes. Yes or no is fine. The judge's gaze held for a beat. One line. Counselor. Don't make me babysit. I won't, I said. I moved, but not away. You're responsible for the packet once it entered this court's control. Yes. And the first time you personally saw it was in the hallway outside this courtroom. The witness hesitated, the smallest pause that made Halden's head turn. Then he nodded. Yes. Not at the point of sealing. No. Not at the point of labeling. No. Halden made a sharp note, the kind that wasn't about facts. It was about later. The room went quiet in that specific way, like everyone had leaned forward without realizing it. I kept my voice low, like I was asking something simple. Then you can't personally swear the label you saw in the hallway was the same label that existed at the moment of sealing? Helen, shut up. Objection. On what? The judge asked. Relevance. The judge's eyes stayed on the witness. Answer if you can. Holden's head snapped up. Rourke's gaze fixed on me, suddenly alert. The witness blinked, trapped between obedience and truth. He swallowed once. No, he said, and the word came out flat and final. The stenographer's keys fired like rain on a window. Holden was on his feet. Objection? Argumentative. The judge looked at the witness, then at Holden. Overruled. Answer stands. Holden sat down like he'd been ordered. His face didn't change, but the air did. The squeeze became colder. Helen moet fest en redirect. Standard procedure, correct? He asked. Yes. And you observed no tampering? No. No suspicious handling? No. Holden turned to the judge. The record is clear. Your Honour. The witness gave him the answers he wanted, but he couldn't give him back the certainty of that label at the moment it mattered. My phone buzzed again. Twice. Close together. Not a notification. A demand. It kept my hand still. I didn't look down. I didn't give the room the satisfaction of seeing me flinch. Holden's eyes flicked toward my pocket like he'd heard it too. The judge didn't look at me, but his irritation landed on the bench like a weight. One more disruption, and I'd be the issue, not the file. Rourke's mouth curved, barely. He didn't have to say June's name. He only had to let me wonder if this was random timing or pressure with a clock. Recess, the judge said. I stood with slow control and stepped into the hallway, away from the microphone and the stenographer. The courthouse air felt thinner out here, like it expected me to faint. 3 missed calls from the school front office. A voicemail transcript sat on the screen. Miss Vale, this is the front office. June was called in for an early dismissal. Please come to the office immediately. Do not send anyone else. I hit callback. An automated line answered. If this is about June Vale, come to the office now. A new text from an unknown number. June's pickup was changed. Come to the office. Now. The school front office sat behind glass like a bank. Everything about it made children feel small on purpose. I parked badly and left the engine running. The asphalt threw heat up at my legs as I walked. The bell had just rung. The hallway spilled noise. Lockers, sneakers, a teacher calling names. Harmless sounds that turned sharp when you realized someone could use them as cover. June came out with her backpack hanging off one shoulder. She saw me and relaxed. Just a fraction. An official-looking man stepped into my path before I could reach her. Button-down shirt. Lanyard. Clipboard. The costume of authority. Miss Vale, he said, like he'd practiced it. We need to speak with your daughter. June stopped. Her hand tightened on the strap. I didn't touch her. Touching could be framed. Who are you? I asked. He flashed a badge too quickly to read. Base Family Services Liaison. Vague on purpose. Lawful sounding without being checkable. I didn't authorize this, I said. It's not optional. He angled his body so June was behind him, not behind me. A small move with a big intention. June's eyes darted to mine. Mom? I'm here, I said. Stay where you are. He lowered his voice, trying to pull me into private. We can do this quietly. No witnesses. No light. I looked past him. Parents were stacking up at the curb, engines idling. A teacher stood by the doors with a radio on her hip. 2 kids hovered close enough to hear everything. Visibility wasn't comfort. Visibility was leverage. June, I said, loud enough that the teacher glanced over. Come stand next to me. The man shifted, trying to block her again. I raised my voice 1 notch. Miss Reynolds, can you come here for a second? The teacher hesitated, then walked over. Is everything okay? The man turned his badge toward her. Slower this time. He wanted her on his side. I didn't let him set the frame. This person is trying to separate me from my daughter. I said, plain and ugly. He says it's not optional. I want to know who signed that, and I want it in writing. June stepped closer to me. Her shoulder brushed my arm. I let her choose the contact. The teacher looked uncertain. Sir, do you have an appointment on file? It's authorized, he said, tapping the clipboard. We're within our rights. Whose rights? I asked. Your name, your supervisor, a phone number I can call while you stand here. His jaw tightened. The costume worked best in private. You're making a scene, he said. That's the point, I said, still loud enough for the curb to hear. If you're lawful, you shouldn't mind witnesses. A few heads turned. Not everyone. Enough. He looked at June and smiled, rehearsed. June Vale, right? We just need to ask you a few questions. June's chin lifted. About what? About your mother. The curb noise dipped, the way a crowd changes when it realizes something interesting is happening. June's breath hitched. My hands wanted to do something stupid. I didn't. I kept my fingers open and visible. Sir, I said, step back. He didn't. Miss Reynolds, I said, call the front office. Now. Her radio crackled as she raised it. Admin to main doors. I added, still loud, and please stay right here with us. Reynolds nodded once. I'm not leaving. That was the turn. The moment the situation stopped being a private squeeze and became a public problem, a school administrator appeared, breathless and annoyed. Not a hero, just someone who hated surprises. What's going on? He asked. Routine liaison. Contact, the man said. Name and paperwork, the administrator said. I have authorization, the man replied. Then show it, the administrator said. Here, or you leave. I don't know him, I said. He won't identify who authorized him. He's trying to separate my daughter from me. The administrator did the math of lawsuits and angry parents watching. He held out a hand. Sir, if you have documentation, it goes through my office. We don't release children to outside parties without verification. Outside parties. A small shield, but real. The man leaned in and said something low to the administrator. I didn't catch the words, but I caught the intent. Pressure. Implied consequences. The administrator's face tightened. Then he looked at June. Not today, he said. If there's a request, the parent is present. The man's voice sharpened. You're refusing a lawful contact. I'm protecting a child, the administrator said. You can call your office from the street. The man stared at him like he'd broken an agreement. Then he stepped back, slow, as if withdrawing a blade. June moved closer to me without asking. That was the win, and the cost at once. She'd learned that safety required a performance. He wrote something on his clipboard, deliberate. I'll note your refusal. My refusal? I said. You haven't shown me anything to refuse. He finally let the mask slip, just for a second. Last chance, he said quietly. Just for me. Don't make this harder. He walked away toward the street, blending into traffic like he'd never been there. June exhaled in a shaky rush. Are we in trouble? We're in a situation, I said, hating how careful it sounded. The question that mattered wasn't whether they could ask. It was how many routines they already had access to, and how fast they could weaponize them. As we walked to the car, I could feel eyes on my back. Someone had their phone out. Maybe it was for safety. Maybe it was for gossip. Either way, my daughter was now an item in someone else's feed. June climbed in and shut the door too hard. "The Artbild," I said. "I know," she snapped, then clicked it anyway. "Are they going to take me?" she asked. "No," I said. "Not alone. Not quietly." She swallowed. "What if they come back?" "Then we stay visible," I said. "Like today?" "Like today," I said. "And if they don't care?" "Then we make them care," I said. "We make them do it in daylight." My phone buzzed once. I didn't need to read it to feel the hook. A message. Unknown number. Last chance. Sign. By day 3, the courtroom had learned my face, the way a room learned a leak. Holden was already set up when I walked in, papers squared, voice ready. Rourke sat behind him with that same calm interest, like he was watching a show he'd already bought tickets for. Pike was there too, a shadow with rank. I took my seat and kept my hands flat on the table. The microphone waited. The stenographer's keys started, steady and merciless. The judge called us to order. Hellenstu. Your Honour, before we proceed, the government requests clarification on the scope of counsel's intended questioning. The judge didn't look impressed. Councillor Vale, keep it tight today. I will, I said. Rourke leaned forward, voice warm and loud enough for the mic. Before she does, I have a question. Halden didn't turn. Vice Admiral, this isn't your witness. It's my courtroom, Rourke said, smiling. At least it feels like it. The judge's eyes snapped up. Vice Admiral Rourke, unless you have a legal point, you sit. Rourke lifted his hands like he was surrendering. Just curiosity, Your Honour. Everyone keeps whispering that counsel has a call sign. A few quiet breaths moved through the gallery. It wasn't laughter. It was anticipation. Rourke tilted his head at me. What was it? Something dramatic. Something you told yourself when you wanted to feel important. He was making it a joke, so any truth I said would sound like ego. I let the silence hold for one beat. The room hated silence. Are you asking for the record, Vice Admiral? I said. Rourke's eyebrows lifted. Oh, for the record. Halden cut in. Your Honour, irrelevant. Rourke replied without looking at him. It goes to credibility. Motive. Why she's doing this. The judge exhaled, irritated. Counsellor, answer or move on. My mouth went dry. I leaned toward the microphone. You want motive? Rourke's smile widened. Please. I'm doing this because you tried to make the record too clean, I said. Hetton snapped. Objection. Sustained, the judge said. Counsellor, no speeches. Rourke chuckled once. Too clean. That's adorable. Pike hadn't moved all morning, but his eyes stayed on me, steady, like I was a problem he'd already decided to solve. I looked down at my folder, not because I needed it, but because it bought me half a breath. Legal hold had made the paper feel heavier than it should. Then I looked back up. Vice Admiral, I said. You asked for my call sign. Rourke spread his hands. I did. Halden leaned forward, a warning in his tone. Counsellor. The judge's voice hardened. Les détours. Then we proceed. I made a decision I couldn't unmake. Cinder, Kestrel, I said. The words hit the room and didn't bounce. They sank. The stenographer's keys stopped for half a second, then resumed, faster. Halden's head turned sharply toward Rourke, then to Pike, then back to me. The mask slipped just enough to show calculation. Rourke's smile cracked. Not much. Rourke tried to recover. That's cute. Is that supposed to impress someone? It's supposed to be accurate, I said. The judge's tone cut through. Counsellor. Questions. Now. Yes, Your Honour, I said, and stood. I turned to the witness and kept my voice flat. State your name for the record, I said. He did. You handled the packet delivered to this courtroom on day 1. End of. Yes, he said. And you saw the label on the outside? Yes. Read it, I said. He hesitated just long enough to be honest. Brine lantern, he said. Holden was up. Objection. Overruled, the judge said. He answered. I kept going, fast enough to deny Halden tempo, slow enough for the record. Then the room changed again. A low rustle sounded at the back of the courtroom. Not conversation. Movement. Controlled. The bailiff turned his head. His hand touched his belt. Reflexive. Then he relaxed as a uniformed courier stepped in. The courier held an envelope sealed and stamped, flat in both hands like it mattered. He didn't look at anyone. He walked straight to the bench. Even Rourke stopped performing. The judge accepted the envelope, glanced at the seal, and his expression shifted. Recognition, not fear. Holden's posture tightened. Pike's gaze stayed fixed on the bench. The judge opened the envelope carefully. He read one line, then another. The silence stretched. The stenographer didn't type. Then the judge looked up. Admiral Sloan has submitted a condition, he said. Rourke's voice went cold. Condition? The judge glanced back down. I'm reading one line for the record. He looked up again. No contact with the minor. No further pressure outside this courtroom. Counsel meets Sloan today. Rourke's smile returned. Brittle. We don't take orders by courier. The judge didn't blink. You will in my courtroom. The judge's eyes flicked. Once. To me. Councillor Vale, you will meet with Admiral Sloane's office immediately after adjournment. Holden didn't move, but his face went still. And, the judge continued, you will sign nothing today without her present. Rourke's gaze cut into me. Not anger. Assessment. Outside the courtroom, my phone buzzed once, distant and muffled like a heartbeat. Inside, the judge added one more line, and it landed like a lock. This is your last lane. Counsellor, choose it carefully. They called it a pause, which was the courthouse way of saying time now belonged to someone else. The email hit my inbox before I reached the back corridor. Subject, Wellness check-in, Counsel Vale. 3 lines. Polite, built like a fence. We're concerned about the strain of recent proceedings. Then, your continued participation will be reviewed for risk and readiness. They used the language of care the way you used a glove, to touch, without leaving prints. In the corridor, people did what they did when a file became radioactive. They stopped saying my name. They looked through me. A paralegal I'd nodded at all week slowed beside me and didn't quite stop. Counsellor, she said, voice small. They're saying you're unstable. Are you saying it? I asked. Her eyes flicked toward a ceiling camera. I'm saying don't answer emails, she whispered. They're building a packet. Then she walked away, like we'd never met. My phone buzzed once. I didn't need to read it to feel the hook. Unknown number. 1 line. Come alone. Now. I kept moving, because stopping was how you let them make you a story. Miles Cade came out of a side office with a stack of forms. He didn't slow, didn't make eye contact. But his hand tapped the top sheet twice. Fast, like a signal that could still be denied. Meeting? I asked, voice low. Backside, he said. No invites. Anything else? I asked. He gave me a look that said, You already know. They're watching your inbox, he said. And mine. I didn't say his name again. I didn't need to. The bailiff found me like he'd been told where to look. Councillor Veal, he said. This way. He walked me past the public benches to a narrow conference room that pretended it wasn't a holding cell. Fluorescent lights buzzed. The air smelled like copier heat. Inside, Admiral Petra Sloan sat at the table with Commander Nadine Crowe standing by the window. Sloan looked like she was here to end a problem cleanly. Crowe watched our reflections like they could tell her who would break first. Holden stood near the door with a folder held like a leash. Pike leaned on the opposite frame like he owned the hinge. Rourke hovered at the threshold, performing restraint. No one raised their voice. That was the point. Sloan didn't waste openings. Councillor Veal, she said. You've created a visibility issue. I didn't create it, I said. I survived it. Rourke smiled, still auditioning as the adult. Crowe cut in. We're here to stop spread. Spread, I said. You mean people talking? Holden set the folder on the table. We mean risk, he said. You mean paper? I said. Sloan's eyes didn't move. You asked for an exit, she said. You're getting one. Today. The word today had weight. It also had traps. What's the price? I asked. Containment, Hayden said. You stop turning hearings into spectacle. And you stop touching my kid, I said. Pike's voice came out flat. No one touched her. I didn't blink. You tried. At school. With a clipboard and a smile. Silence. The kind that meant I'd hit something real. Crowe's tone went practical. List your clean exit pack. I did it slowly, like reading conditions into a record. June protected from unofficial contact or monitoring. No procedural trap that drags me back in. And a defensive evidence shield. Enough to keep me from being crushed later. Rourke scoffed. You're asking for immunity. I'm asking for air, I said. Sloan held up a hand. The room obeyed without noticing it. We can enforce a boundary, she said. No contact with the minor. No outreach. No wellness checks that aren't requested. Any violation becomes part of the record. And the file? I asked. Crowe answered. Contained. Under legal hold, I said, watching their faces. Helen's your flixt. Yes. Crowe studied me. You spoke to an outside lane. Rourke's voice sharpened. A reporter? I gave one verifiable point to one person. I said. Nothing operational. Nothing that hurts anyone. Just enough to make stalling expensive. Holden leaned forward. What point? That your witness's timeline is too clean, I said. And clean isn't the same as true. Pike's mouth twitched. Calculation. Holden slid a single page toward me. Draft terms, he said. I didn't touch it. Drafts are where you stall, I said. If I disappear on a draft, you call it voluntary. Crowe's voice went low. You walk out now. You stay in your lane." "What lane?" I asked. Sloan answered. "The one that keeps your child untouched," she said, "and keeps this court from becoming a wildfire." She stood and spoke to someone outside. "Print it." A minute later, the hallway printer whirred. Paper fed through with a dry rasp. A stamp hit twice, sharp and final, and someone made sure the sound carried. A clerk entered with a single page held in both hands. Sloan scanned it, then set it on the table in front of me. The bottom line read, "Effective immediately." "There," Sloan said. "Clean exit pack. Enforced today." My eyes caught one line in the body text, a compartment label I'd learned to fear. Brine lantern. Still alive. Still contained. I finally took the order. The paper was warm from the printer. My phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a threat. It was a calendar invite with no agenda. Meeting. Admiral Sloan. Tonight. Location. Gate admin. The pause was over. The next squeeze wouldn't be rhetorical. The first thing that went wrong happened at the gate, not in a courtroom. Day 3. Night. An envelope waited under my wiper. Redeployment option. Voluntary support pathway. Retirement counselling available. What they offered wasn't help. It was a lane. June frowned. "So they want you to quit?" "They want me to disappear politely," I said. June watched me read it through the windshield. "Is that for you?" "It's for the problem I became," I said. "Are you taking it?" she asked, too calm for her age. I stared at the memo again. "What's the catch?" June asked. "Silence," I said. "And letting them tell the ending." I folded it and put it in the glove box. "We're going home," I said. "Not to a lane, just home." We drove toward the outer road that led past the shipyard and out through the base gates. June sat in the passenger seat, backpack on her lap like a shield, watching the barrier arm like it might bite. "Are they going to stop us?" she asked. "They're going to try," I said. "You just keep breathing." The guard leaned out, took my ID, then didn't give it back. "I'm not seeing clearance," he said. "I'm not here for clearance," I said. "I'm here to leave." He clicked once. "Order shows as pending." "Pending?" I repeated. "So someone chose pending." June's voice came out small. "Mum?" "I'm fine," I said. The lie automatic. I kept my tone level because panic was a gift you handed to people who wanted you smaller. I pulled the folder from the seat beside me. The executed order still smelled faintly of toner. I didn't wave it. I slid it up where the booth camera could see the stamp. "This is not pending," I said. "This is effective immediately." The guard's eyes flicked to the paper, then back to his screen. He kept his eyes on the screen like it could protect him. "Ma'am, I can't." "You can," I said. "You're just deciding not to." "You don't understand," he said, and sounded like he meant it. "I understand exactly," I said. "You're about to put your name on a log." His jaw tightened. "I need to verify," he said. "Verify now," I said. "Not after my kid sits here in a lit lane while you decide if her safety is an administrative inconvenience." June went rigid, trying to disappear into the seat. That hurt more than any cross-exam. The guard picked up his phone. "Gate 2, he said. "Council Vale. She has an executed order." He listened. "Yes, sir," he added. "Effective, immediately." Then he nodded once. When he hung up, his voice had softened. "Step out of the vehicle," he said. "For what?" I said. "A photo?" He didn't answer. June flinched. I put my hand lightly on her knee. "Stay buckled," I said. "Look at me." Her eyes found mine. She breathed the way she'd been taught, steady and quiet. I stepped out. The cold hit clean. "We need to confirm you're authorized to transport the miner off installation," the guard said. "She's my daughter," I said. "I understand," he said, and didn't sound like he meant it. "You mean you want to pretend she's a package?" I said. "Her name is June, and your own order says no contact with the miner. Holding her here to pressure me counts." He glanced at the stamp again, like he hoped it would fade. "We're following the system." "The system has a timestamp," I said. "And so does your log. Pick one." A car rolled up behind us, headlights filling the lane. Inside the booth, a phone rang again. "That's not my problem," I heard the guard say. He listened, then went still. When he hung up, he handed my ID back through the window. "You're cleared to exit," he said. "Now," I said. The barrier arm rose slow, motor whining like it resented the motion. I got back in the car, hands tight on the wheel. June exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for an hour. We rolled forward under the raised arm, and a figure stood beyond the booth lights, half in shadow, watching the lane like it belonged to him. "Pike." He didn't block the car. He didn't shout. He only stepped close enough that I could see the fine lines at the corner of his mouth. He didn't look at June. He looked at me. "You didn't win," he said, soft. "You bought time." "Time is what she needed," I said. Pike's eyes flickered. Once, toward June. "She'll remember this." "I'm counting on it," I said. "So will you." His mouth twitched. "Someone has to pay." He believed it. Losing a round didn't change a premise that deep. I didn't answer. Answering would make it a debate. I drove. June whispered, barely audible, "Is he going to follow us?" "No," I said. "He doesn't have to. The system will." As the tires crossed the painted line out of the lane, my phone lit once on the console, a silent notification I didn't open. "It's not over, is it?" June asked. "No," I said. "But we're moving." The base fell behind us. The night road opened up. June slipped a hair tie off her wrist and dropped it into the cup holder beside my keys. "Keep it," she said, eyes on the road. "So you don't forget." "I won't," I said. She leaned her head to the window and let her eyes close. I kept the executed order on the seat between us, stamp facing up. Tired. Marked. Moving. June's voice drifted up from the passenger seat. "Mum?" "I'm here," I said. My phone lit once, and I didn't open it.